Racist cop harasses black woman. Seconds later, her bodyguards step in. In this eye-opening video, we witness a shocking instance of racial profiling where a black woman faces harassment from a police officer. What starts as a routine encounter quickly escalates, revealing underlying biases and systemic issues. The officer's aggressive approach and unjustified actions highlight the ongoing struggle against racial discrimination and profiling. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
That morning, Rachel had woken up early to run errands before picking up her daughter from school. Her day had started like any other, but it took a sharp turn when she realized she'd left her wallet at home. Parked in the grocery store lot, she searched her car, checking under seats and in the glove compartment. She didn't notice the older white woman watching her from across the lot, clutching her purse tightly and eyeing Rachel with suspicion. The call to the police was made within minutes. "There's a black woman acting suspicious in the parking lot," the woman told the dispatcher. "She looks like she's trying to break into cars." Rachel's heart sank when she saw the police cruiser pull up. She stood tall as Officer Bradley approached her, his hand already on his holstered gun. "Can I help you, officer?" Rachel asked, her tone polite but firm. "We got a call about a suspicious individual," Bradley said, looking her up and down. "What are you doing here? Looking for my wallet? Is that a crime now?" Her answer irritated him. "I'm gonna need to see some ID," he demanded. Rachel sighed. "I just told you. I left my wallet at home. That's why I'm here, trying to find it." Bradley's jaw tightened. "Mom, I'm going to need you to step away from the car." Rachel hesitated. She knew how these situations could escalate, but she also knew her rights. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, standing her ground. The tension grew. Onlookers gathered at a safe distance, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. Bradley didn't like being challenged. "Put your hands on the car," he barked. Rachel's face hardened. "No! You have no reason to treat me like a criminal." Within seconds, Bradley grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back. Rachel winced but didn't cry out. She knew her calmness would infuriate him more than any resistance. "Call my husband," she said as he cuffed her. "I don't take orders from criminals," Bradley shot back. Rachel smirked, her voice steady. "Then this is about to get real interesting for you." The ride to the station was quiet except for the sound of Bradley's radio. Rachel stared out the window, her mind racing. She wasn't afraid for herself. She knew Fred would handle this. But the humiliation of being treated this way burned deep. Back at the store, word of the arrest spread quickly. The older woman who had made the call watched the footage from someone's phone, her ex. Pression turning uneasy. "Maybe I overreacted," she muttered to herself. Meanwhile, Fred Jefferson was speeding through the city, his jaw clenched and his mind focused. Rachel had told him about the officer's aggression before the call abruptly ended. He wasn't sure what he would find at the station, but he knew one thing. This officer had made a mistake he wouldn't soon forget. At the precinct, Bradley led Rachel through the booking process, his tone condescending. "Don't worry. This'll all go faster if you just cooperate," he said. Rachel didn't respond. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. As he finished fingerprinting her, a loud commotion erupted in the lobby. Bradley glanced at the door and froze. A tall black man in a tailored suit stormed in, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Where is she?" Fred demanded, his deep voice echoing off the walls. Bradley's face paled. He didn't know the man's identity, but he could tell he wasn't someone to mess with. "She's in processing," the desk officer stammered. Fred's sharp glare turned to Bradley, who had just stepped into the hallway. Recognition flickered in Rachel's eyes as she watched her husband approach. The room grew silent as Fred locked eyes with Bradley. "We need to talk," Fred said, his voice calm but full of authority. Bradley's hand twitched at his side, his confidence faltering. "And you are?" Rachel, standing a few feet away, smiled slightly. "Oh, you'll find out." Officer Bradley's pulse quickened as the imposing man closed the distance between them. Fred Jefferson didn't need to raise his voice to command the room's attention. His mere presence was enough. Bradley hesitated, his hand brushing against his holstered taser. Something about the man's calm but unyielding demeanor told him this wasn't going to end the way he had planned. "I'm Judge Fred Jefferson," Fred said, his words cutting through the air like a blade, "and I'd like to know why my wife is in handcuffs." Bradley's throat went dry. "Judge?" He glanced at Rachel, who stood with her hands still cuffed behind her, an almost amused expression on her face. The murmurs of officers and staff in the station reached Bradley's ears, but he couldn't make out their words. He was too focused on the man in front of him. This is standard procedure," Bradley stammered, his voice losing the confidence it had carried earlier. "Standard procedure?" Fred repeated, his voice low and deliberate. "Your standard procedure is to arrest a woman who was doing nothing but looking for her wallet?" Before Bradley could respond, Fred turned to the desk officer. "Uncuff her. Now." The officer looked between Fred and Bradley, unsure of what to do. Bradley's authority as the arresting officer clashed with the undeniable weight of Fred's position. Bradley clenched his jaw, regaining some of his composure. Judge or not, she was acting suspiciously. "We received a call about—" "A call?" Fred interrupted. His voice didn't rise, but the tension in the room did. "From whom? And what exactly did my wife do that warranted this level of treatment?" Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "A witness reported her acting suspiciously near parked cars. When I arrived, she refused to comply with my instructions." Rachel laughed softly, shaking her head. "Refusing to comply? You mean standing up for myself when you treated me like a criminal without cause?" "Mom, you were uncooperative," Bradley shot back, his tone defensive. Fred raised a hand, silencing them both. His sharp gaze moved to Rachel's wrists, still bound by the cuffs. "Take them off." The desk officer scrambled to retrieve the key, not waiting for Bradley's approval. As soon as the cuffs clicked open, Rachel rubbed her wrists, her expression a mix of relief and anger. Fred placed a protective hand on her shoulder before looking back at Bradley. "Now, officer, let's talk about your procedure." The events leading up to Fred's arrival replayed in Rachel's mind. She had spent the ride to the station weighing her options. She knew her husband's influence would clear her name, but that wasn't enough. She wanted to expose the injustice she'd endured, not just for herself, but for everyone who didn't have someone like Fred in their corner. When they arrived at the station, Bradley's dismissive attitude had only fueled her resolve. As she stood in the processing room, she silently counted the minutes until Fred arrived. She didn't have to call him again. She knew he'd come. But now, as Fred took control of the situation, she felt a mix of gratitude and frustration. Gratitude for his unwavering support, but frustration at the system that made it necessary. Back in the station, Bradley's confidence continued to waver as Fred pressed him. "You arrested her without evidence of a crime. You escalated the situation instead of resolving it. Is that your version of protecting and serving?" Bradley squared his shoulders, trying to salvage his authority. "Judge Jefferson, I was acting on a report from a concerned citizen. It's my job to investigate." "And did you investigate or did you jump to conclusions?" Fred asked, his tone sharp. The room fell silent. Bradley's face flushed with anger and embarrassment, but he had no response. Rachel stepped forward, her voice steady and calm. "You didn't ask me a single question before assuming I was a threat. You didn't listen when I tried to explain." Do you know how many times this happens to people who look like me? Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but Fred cut him off. Enough. Rachel, are you okay? I'm fine, she said, though her voice wavered slightly. But this can't just be about me. This has to stop. Fred nodded, his expression softening as he looked at her. Then he turned back to Bradley. This isn't over. I'll be filing a formal complaint, and you can expect to hear from my attorney. Bradley's face twisted in frustration, but he said nothing. As Fred and Rachel left the station, the weight of what had happened began to settle over them. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, many of them holding phones, recording and taking pictures. Rachel paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Some were supportive, others curious. A few looked skeptical, their expressions suggesting they thought she'd exaggerated or overreacted. Fred noticed her hesitation and placed a hand on her arm. "Let's go home," he said gently. Rachel nodded. But as they walked to his car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. That night, as they sat in their living room, Rachel recounted the incident in detail. Fred listened intently, his anger simmering just below the surface. "We need to do more than file a complaint," Rachel said. "This is bigger than just me. It's about the way people like him treat people like us." Fred nodded. "You're right. Well, make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug." Just as Rachel began to relax, Fred's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "What is it?" Rachel asked. "It's the precinct," Fred said, his tone cautious. "They want to talk." Rachel's heart sank, but she squared her shoulders. "Let's hear what they have to say." Fred answered the call, putting it on speaker so Rachel could hear. A tense voice on the other end greeted him. "Judge Jefferson, this is Captain Morgan from the precinct. I want to apologize for the incident today. It appears there was a misunderstanding." Fred's expression didn't change, but Rachel's jaw tightened. "A misunderstanding?" Fred said coolly. "Your officer unlawfully detained my wife. That's more than a misunderstanding." "Of course," Morgan replied hastily. "We're reviewing the matter internally and taking it very seriously. Officer Bradley will be questioned and, if necessary, disciplined." Rachel leaned closer to the phone. "Captain Morgan, I appreciate your call, but what's being done to address the systemic issue here? This isn't just about one officer, it's about how people like me are treated every day." There was a long pause on the other end. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Jefferson. Perhaps we can arrange a meeting to discuss this further?" Rachel exchanged a glance with Fred. She wasn't sure if this was genuine or an attempt to smooth things over. "Well, consider it," Fred said, ending the call before Morgan could respond. Rachel folded her arms, staring at the phone. "You think they really want to fix this? Or are they just covering their tracks?" Fred sighed. "It's hard to say. But one thing's certain, we're not letting this go." The next morning, Rachel woke up to a flood of messages on her phone. Videos of her arrest had gone viral overnight, with hashtags like "Gir Justice for Rachel" and "Gir Racism in Policing" trending on social media. News outlets were already picking up the story, and opinions were pouring in from all sides. Some people expressed outrage at the injustice, while others accused Rachel of overreacting or playing the victim. Rachel's hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. "Don't read those," Fred said, walking into the room. He took the phone from her gently and set it on the table. "It's hard not to," Rachel admitted. "This is my life they're debating." Fred sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her knee. "Let them talk. We'll stick to the facts and focus on what matters, making sure this doesn't happen again." Rachel nodded, though the knot in her stomach didn't loosen. Later that day, Fred and Rachel met with a civil rights attorney, Gloria Harris, at her office. Gloria, a sharp and passionate advocate, listened intently as Rachel recounted the incident. "This is a clear case of racial profiling," Gloria said. Well, pursue legal action against T, he precinct, and well make sure the public knows exactly what happened. Rachel hesitated. I don't want this to just be about me. I want this to be about changing the system. Gloria smiled. That's exactly what we'll do. Your case can set a precedent, Rachel. We'll push for reform, training, and accountability. But it starts with making them answer for what they did to you. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling a mix of determination and anxiety. Let's do it. While the legal wheels began to turn, Bradley's life took a turn of its own. After news of the incident spread, he faced growing scrutiny. His neighbors whispered about him. His colleagues avoided him. Even his superiors seemed distant, their support for him waning. Sitting alone in his apartment, Bradley scrolled through the videos of the arrest, reading the comments. For the first time, he saw himself through the eyes of others. The way he had grabbed Rachel, the dismissive tone in his voice. But instead of remorse, anger bubbled up inside him. They don't know what it's like out there, he muttered to himself. They don't know what we deal with every day. His phone buzzed with a message from his union representative advising him to avoid speaking to the media. But Bradley couldn't shake the feeling that his career was slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Rachel's story continued to gain traction. She was invited to speak on a morning news program where she recounted the events of that day. I wasn't just fighting for myself in that moment, Rachel said, her voice steady. I was thinking about every person who's been treated like they don't belong, like they're less than human, simply because of the color of their skin. Her words resonated with viewers across the country, but they also attracted backlash. Anonymous threats flooded her inbox, warning her to drop the case. As Rachel and Fred sat in their living room that evening reviewing the latest developments, the sound of a rock shattering their front window jolted them both. Fred rushed to the window, his fists clenched as he peered outside. The darkness concealed the perpetrator, but the message was clear. Rachel stood frozen, her heart pounding. Fred turned to her, his face a mix of anger and concern. This isn't just about us anymore, he said quietly. Rachel nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we fight harder. The shattered window became more than a reminder of the hostility they faced. It was a turning point. Fred replaced the glass the next morning, but the unease lingered in the air. Rachel stayed strong in public, but in private, the weight of the threats pressed on her. Despite the risks, they decided to press forward with their fight. Rachel's courage inspired many, but the backlash also intensified. Every step felt like a balancing act between progress and peril. Later that week, Rachel and Fred met with a coalition of local activists and community leaders in a packed church hall. People of all ages and backgrounds filled the room, their faces a blend of hope and determination. Rachel stood at the front, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. This isn't just about what happened to me, she began, her voice steady. It's about a system that sees Black people as threats before it sees them as human. That has to change. The room erupted in applause, the energy palpable. A young woman raised her hand to speak. How can we help? She asked, her voice filled with earnestness. Rachel smiled, the fire in her eyes burning brighter. We need to push for real change, demand better training for officers, independent oversight of misconduct cases, and accountability when they get it wrong. And we need to make sure this doesn't disappear from the headlines. The crowd nodded in agreement, their collective resolve growing stronger. As the meeting wrapped up, Fred noticed a man lingering near the back of the room, his eyes fixed on Rachel. Cement, hing about his posture, set off alarm bells. Fred stepped closer, his protective instincts kicking in. Can I help you? Fred asked, his tone firm. The man, a middle-aged white man in a police jacket, looked startled. He held up his hands defensively. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said quickly. I'm Detective Randall. I work at the precinct. Rachel joined them, her expression guarded. Why are you here? Randall hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. I came to warn you. There are people on the force who don't want this case to go anywhere. You're stirring up things they'd rather keep buried. Fred narrowed his eyes. Are you one of those people? No, Randall said firmly. I've been trying to push for change from the inside for years. But this, what happened to you, it's different. It's got them nervous. Rachel crossed her arms. What exactly are you warning us about? Randall's voice dropped. Watch your back. Not everyone plays by the rules. That evening, Rachel and Fred sat in their living room, processing Randall's words. The tension between them was thick, but not from anger. Rather, it was the weight of the choices they were making. Do you think he's telling the truth? Rachel asked. Fred leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I don't know, but we can't ignore the possibility that he is. Rachel sighed. It's exhausting, having to fight just to be treated like a human being. But we can't stop now. Fred reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. We won't. Together? 2 days later, a surprising turn of events shocked them both. The precinct released a public statement acknowledging the need for an internal review of their practices. Captain Morgan held a press conference declaring that they were committed to transparency and change. Rachel watched the announcement on TV with a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism. Do you think they mean it? She asked Fred. It's a start, he said, though his tone carried skepticism. The statement sparked renewed attention on the case, and Rachel's face was splashed across news outlets once more. Support poured in from all corners of the country, but so did the vitriol. One evening, as they returned home from a community event, Fred noticed a car parked across the street, its headlights off. He parked in the driveway, keeping an eye on the vehicle as they exited the car. Inside, he whispered to Rachel, his voice tense. She nodded, sensing his unease. Once inside, Fred locked the door and checked the windows. The car remained parked, its driver obscured by the darkness. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was chilling. You're making too much noise. Stop now, or we'll make you. Her hands shook as she showed the message to Fred. He read it silently, his face hardening. We're not backing down, he said, his voice firm. Rachel nodded, though fear gripped her heart. But we have to be careful. Whoever this is, they're watching us. Fred pulled her into a hug, his arms wrapping around her protectively. We'll get through this. They won't scare us into silence. The following day, Fred contacted Gloria and informed her about the text and the suspicious car. Gloria wasted no time filing a report demanding increased security for Rachel and Fred. The police department offered minimal assistance, claiming their resources were stretched thin. Rachel saw it as another attempt to brush off their concerns. But she refused to let fear paralyze her. She continued to attend community meetings, speak at events, and share her story with journalists. One evening, while addressing a large crowd at a rally, a commotion erupted near the stage. Fred immediately stepped in front of Rachel as two men tried to push past security. Get her out of here, Fred shouted to Gloria, who was nearby. As the crowd scattered, the men were subdued by Secchio, Riddy, but their intentions remained unclear. Rachel was shaken but unharmed. As they left the rally under heavy guard, Fred turned to Rachel, his voice filled with a mix of anger and determination. This has gone too far. It's time to escalate this fight. Rachel nodded, her eyes blazing with resolve. Let's do it. The rally incident left Rachel and Fred shaken but emboldened. The message was clear. Their fight was rattling the wrong people, and whoever was behind the threats was willing to escalate. Fred, however, saw this as an opportunity to double down. That night, as the news replayed the footage of the men being detained, Fred sat at his desk drafting an open letter. It wasn't just to the local authorities, it was aimed at the national stage. The next morning, Rachel sat beside Fred as he hit send. The letter went out to every major news outlet, civil rights organization, and influential leader across the country. It demanded justice, accountability, and immediate action to address systemic racism in law enforcement. Within hours, the letter went viral. Phone calls and emails flooded in. Some were messages of support, others were angry diatribes. But one call stood out, a request for Rachel and Fred to testify before a congressional committee investigating police reform. Rachel's hands trembled as she ended the call. "Fred, they want us to testify." "This is huge." Fred smiled, though his expression was tinged with caution. "It is. But it also puts us in the spotlight more than ever." Rachel nodded. "We've come this far. We can't stop now." Meanwhile, Detective Randall, the officer who had warned them earlier, sat in his car outside the precinct, wrestling with his conscience. The pressure inside the department was mounting. Officers whispered about Rachel's case, and the tension was palpable. Randall knew something bigger was at play. He had overheard fragments of conversations that hinted at a coordinated effort to discredit Rachel and Fred. But exposing it would mean risking his career and possibly more. He picked up his phone and hesitated before dialing a number. When Fred answered, Randall took a deep breath. "There's something you need to know," he said. 2 days later, Rachel and Fred met Randall at a diner on the outskirts of town. The detective looked over his shoulder nervously as he slid into the booth. "I don't have much time," he said, his voice low. "But I've been hearing things. There's a group of officers trying to dig up dirt on you, anything they can use to discredit you. And it's not just here. This goes higher up." Rachel's stomach churned. "Higher up? How high?" "I don't know exactly," Randall admitted. "But I've seen the reports they're circulating. They're desperate to silence you." Fred leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Do you have proof?" Randall nodded. "I've got copies. I'll send them to you, but you didn't hear this from me." Rachel reached across the table, her voice firm but grateful. "Thank you for doing the right thing." Randall nodded, but his expression was grim. "Be careful. They're not playing by the rules." The documents Randall provided were damning. They outlined a coordinated effort to paint Rachel as untrustworthy and combative, using doctored footage and out-of-context statements. Worse, they showed communication between the precinct and influential individuals outside the city. Fred and Rachel immediately shared the evidence with Gloria, who moved swiftly to involve federal investigators. "This is just a local problem," Gloria said during a strategy meeting. "This could expose corruption at a much higher level, but it also makes you bigger targets." Rachel took a deep breath, the weight of the moment sinking in. We're not backing down. As the congressional hearing approached, the tension escalated. A mysterious black SUV began appearing near Rachel and Fred's home. Phone calls came in the middle of the night, silent but ominous. One evening, as Rachel prepared dinner, the power suddenly went out. Fred grabbed a flashlight and checked the breaker box, finding nothing wrong. Rachel's phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. "Still think this is worth it?" She showed the message to Fred, her face pale but determined. "They're trying to scare us. It's not going to work." Fred called the police to report the incident, but the responding officer's dismissive attitude made it clear they wouldn't take it seriously. "We'll handle it ourselves," Fred said, his tone resolute. The day of the hearing arrived, and Rachel felt the weight of the nation's eyes on her as she walked into the chamber with Fred by her side. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but she kept her head high. Inside, the room was packed with lawmakers, activists, and media. Rachel's heart raced as she took her seat at the witness table, but she steadied herself, focusing on the reason she was there. When it was her turn to speak, she recounted her experience with clarity and conviction. "This isn't just about what happened to me," she said, her voice unwavering. "It's about a system that sees Black people as threats instead of individuals. A system that must change." Her words drew applause from the audience, but not everyone was moved. A congressman who had aligned himself with pro-police rhetoric challenged her. "Mrs. Jefferson, isn't it possible that Officer Bradley was simply doing his job? Isn't this just a misunderstanding blown out of proportion?" Rachel met his gaze, her expression calm but firm. "When doing his job means assuming guilt based on the color of my skin, the job is broken. And if this is a misunderstanding, it's one that's gotten far too many people killed or unjustly imprisoned." The room erupted in murmurs. Fred watched her with pride, knowing she had just delivered a powerful blow to their opponents. That night, as Rachel and Fred returned home, their sense of accomplishment was tempered by exhaustion. But as they pulled into their driveway, a figure stepped out of the shadows. "Stay in the car," Fred said quickly, his hand moving to his phone to call for help. Rachel's breath caught as the figure approached, but they stopped just short of the car, their face illuminated by the porch light. It was Randall. "I have more," he said, his voice urgent. "And it's bigger than you think." Randall's words hung in the air, thick with urgency. Fred stepped out of the car, keeping himself between Rachel and the detective. "Come inside," Fred said cautiously. Once inside, Randall handed Fred a flash drive. "This has everything," he said. "Emails, meeting notes, and surveillance logs. They've been watching you for weeks, and it goes all the way to the state police department. They're scared of what your case might expose." Rachel frowned, her unease growing. "What exactly are they trying to hide?" Randall hesitated, glancing at the door as though someone might burst in at any moment. "It's a network of officers and officials who've been covering for each other. Misconduct, excessive force, racial profiling, it's all connected. Your case is shining a light on something they've been trying to keep buried for years." Fred inserted the flash drive into his laptop. The screen filled with folders, each one labeled with damning titles: incident cover-ups, officer misconduct reports, communications to state officials. Rachel leaned over Fred's shoulder, her jaw tightening as she read the contents. "This isn't just about me," she said softly. "This is about everyone who's been wronged by this system." Randall nodded. "Exactly. And if you release this, it's going to blow up in ways you can't imagine." The following morning, Gloria reviewed the files with her legal team. "This is a gold mine," she said. Her tone AEM, each of excitement and caution. "But it's also dangerous. If we go public with this, they'll fight back hard. You need to be ready for that." Rachel glanced at Fred, her resolve unwavering. "We've come this far. We're not stopping now." Gloria nodded. "Then, well, need to coordinate with federal investigators. If this goes public without proper protection, it could put you both at even greater risk." Rachel and Fred agreed, but the timeline for action left them feeling vulnerable. They knew the information on the flash drive was a ticking time bomb, and the people it implicated wouldn't sit idly by. Later that night, Fred and Rachel sat on the couch, the weight of their decision heavy in the air. "I'm proud of you," Fred said, breaking the silence. "What you're doing is brave, and it's going to make a difference." Rachel smiled faintly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." As they sat together, the soft hum of their living room was shattered by the sound of shattering glass. Fred jumped to his feet, pulling Rachel behind him as they saw a flaming bottle crash onto the front porch, igniting in a burst of fire. "Stay back," Fred shouted, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the kitchen. Rachel grabbed her phone and called 911, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Someone just firebombed our house," she said, watching as Fred doused the flames. By the time the fire was extinguished, the porch was charred, and the stench of smoke filled the air. The flashing lights of police cars and fire trucks soon lit up the street, drawing neighbors out of their homes. Rachel and Fred watched as officers surveyed the damage. One of them approached, his face hard to read. "Well, investigate this," he said. "But if I were you, I'd lay low for a while." Rachel bristled. Laying low isn't going to solve anything. The officer didn't argue, but his dismissive tone left no doubt that the investigation wouldn't be a priority. The next day, Fred called a press conference in front of their home, the burned porch serving as a stark backdrop. Reporters gathered as Rachel stepped up to the microphones. "This is what happens when you challenge the status quo," she said, her voice steady but firm. "But we will not be silenced. This fight is about justice, accountability, and the right to live without fear of being targeted because of the color of our skin." Her words resonated, drawing support from across the country. Activists, politicians, and public figures began rallying around their cause, amplifying the pressure on law enforcement to address the systemic issues Rachel's case had uncovered. But behind the scenes, the threats continued. Gloria arranged for security to protect Rachel and Fred, but the tension in their home was palpable. One evening, as Rachel was preparing for another interview, Fred received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was cold and deliberate. "You think you've won, but this isn't over," the caller said. "If you don't back off, you'll regret it." Fred clenched his fist, his jaw tightening. "We're not backing off. Do your worst." He hung up and turned to Rachel, his expression grim. "They're not going to stop, but neither are we." Rachel nodded, her resolve unshaken. "Let's expose everything." That night, Fred worked with Gloria and federal investigators to ensure the files from the flash drive were shared securely with major media outlets and government agencies. Within days, explosive reports hit the airwaves, detailing years of corruption, cover-ups, and misconduct within the police department and beyond. The revelation sparked nationwide outrage. Protests erupted in cities across the country, demanding reform and justice for victims of systemic racism. Rachel and Fred watched the news from their living room, their hands tightly clasped. For the first time in weeks, Rachel allowed herself a small smile. "We did it," she said quietly. Fred nodded, his expression a mix of pride and exhaustion. "This is just the beginning. But it's a big step forward." As the momentum for change grew, the backlash against Rachel and Fred began to fade. The people who had threatened them were now under investigation themselves, and the tide was turning in their favor. But just as they began to feel a sense of relief, a knock at the door late one night sent a chill down their spines. Fred approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Standing on the porch was a man in a suit holding an envelope. "Judge Jefferson?" the man asked. "Yes," Fred replied warily. The man handed him the envelope. "This is for you and Mrs. Jefferson. It's from someone who used to work on the inside." Fred closed the door, turning the envelope over in his hands. Rachel joined him, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" she asked. Fred opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. As he read the words, his face hardened. "It's a warning," he said, handing the paper to Rachel. She read it aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "You've only scratched the surface. Be careful who you trust." Rachel held the letter, its weight far greater than the paper itself. The warning echoed in her mind as she exchanged a glance with Fred. "Whoever sent this, they know something we don't," Fred said. "But why give us a warning instead of staying silent?" Rachel's brow furrowed. "Maybe they want to help." Or maybe they're trying to scare us into stopping. Fred set the letter on the table, his fingers tapping anxiously. Either way, we need to find out what they mean by scratch the surface. Rachel nodded. But we can't let it distract us. The momentum is on our side. We keep pushing forward. The following day, Rachel and Fred met with Gloria to share the letter and discuss their next steps. Gloria's expression darkened as she read it. "This isn't random," she said. "Someone on the inside must have seen the fallout from the files you exposed. They're either trying to help or cover their tracks." Rachel leaned forward. "How do we find out who sent it?" Gloria shook her head. "That's tricky. If they want to stay anonymous, they'll have taken steps to cover their identity. But I can have my team look into it." Fred folded his arms, his mind racing. "Meanwhile, we stay vigilant. If this is a threat, we're not backing down. And if it's a lead, we'll follow it." While Gloria's team investigated the letter, Rachel and Fred continued their public fight for justice. The media attention reached a fever pitch, and the evidence they had exposed led to multiple resignations and investigations into law enforcement officials at the local and state levels. But the more they uncovered, the more they realized how deeply entrenched the corruption was. Randall's files were just the beginning. One evening, Fred received another call from Randall, his voice tinged with urgency. "I found something else," he said. "Meet me tonight." Same diner. Fred hesitated. "Is it safe?" "No," Randall admitted, "but it's important." At the diner, Randall slid into the booth, his face pale and his hands shaking. He placed a small envelope on the table and pushed it toward Fred. "What's this?" Fred asked. "Names," Randall said quietly. "These are the people who've been running the show from behind the scenes. They're powerful, and they'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves." Rachel, who had insisted on coming, looked at Randall intently. "Why are you doing this?" Randall sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Because I'm tired of being part of a system that destroys innocent lives. And because if I don't do this now, you'll regret it forever." Fred opened the envelope and scanned the list. His face hardened as he recognized several prominent named city officials, business, leaders, even a state senator. "This is huge," Fred said, his voice low. Randall nodded. "But it's dangerous. These people won't go down without a fight." As Fred and Rachel left the diner, their minds raced with the implications of the list. The names were a roadmap to the heart of the corruption they were fighting, but exposing them would require careful planning. When they arrived home, Gloria was waiting for them with news about the letter. "It was mailed from a post office 2 towns over," she said. "No fingerprints, no surveillance footage. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing." Fred showed her the list Randall had provided. "This is what we're up against," he said. Gloria's eyes widened as she read the names. "This isn't just corruption. It's a web of power and influence. Taking them down will be the fight of your lives." Rachel squared her shoulders. "Then we fight. For every person who's been silenced, every life that's been destroyed, we fight." Over the next several weeks, Rachel and Fred worked tirelessly with Gloria and her team to build a case against the people on the list. The evidence was overwhelming, but the stakes were higher than ever. The threats against them escalated. One evening, Rachel received a package on their doorstep with no return address. Inside was a single bullet and a note that read, "Stop now, or this is next." Rachel stared at the note, her hands trembling. Fred took it from her and set it on the table, his face a mask of fury. "They're trying to break us," Fred said, "but they don't realize how strong we are." Rachel nodded, though the fear gnawed at her. "We can't let them win." The turning point came when federal agents, armed with the evidence Rachel and Fred had gathered, executed raids on the homes and offices of several individuals on the list. News of the arrests sent shockwaves across the country, further solidifying Rachel and Fred's role as champions of justice. But the victory was bittersweet. The fight had taken a toll on their lives, their sense of safety, and their trust in the world around them. As they watched the news coverage of the arrests, Fred turned to Rachel. "We've come so far, but there's still so much work to do." Rachel smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and determination. "Then let's keep going." Just as they began to feel a sense of relief, Fred's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You think you've won? This isn't over." The text message sent a chill through Rachel and Fred, a grim reminder that their fight was far from over. Yet, they refused to let fear dictate their lives. The arrests of the powerful individuals on the list had sent ripples through the nation, and Rachel's name had become synonymous with courage in the face of injustice. But they knew the system wouldn't change overnight. There would be more battles ahead. A week later, Fred and Rachel were invited to a national summit on police reform in Washington, D.C. It was a gathering of activists, policymakers, and leaders united to address systemic racism in law enforcement. Rachel was the keynote speaker, her story serving as the foundation for a nationwide call to action. Standing at the podium, she looked out at the crowd, her heart pounding. "When this began, I thought I was fighting for my own dignity, my own rights. But this fight has never been just about me. It's about the countless lives affected by a system that too often sees Black people as threats rather than individuals. This isn't just my story, it's our story. And together, we have the power to change it." Her words were met with thunderous applause. Fred watched from the front row, pride and admiration shining in his eyes. After the summit, they returned home to find a small gathering of neighbors waiting for them. Friends and strangers alike had come, together to show their support, leaving flowers, cards, and banners that read, "Thank you, Rachel." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she embraced those who had come to stand with her. "We couldn't have done this without all of you," she said. Her voice thick with emotion. Fred placed an arm around her, his own gratitude visible. "This community has shown us that change starts here, with people who refuse to accept the status quo." The weeks that followed brought more good news. Federal oversight was implemented in the precinct where Rachel had been arrested, and reforms were introduced statewide to ensure greater accountability in law enforcement. Meanwhile, the investigation into the individuals implicated in the corruption scandal continued, with more arrests and resignations making headlines. Rachel and Fred began to reclaim a sense of normalcy. The threats had ceased, the suspicious cars disappeared, and their lives, though forever changed, started to feel safe again. One evening, as they sat on their rebuilt porch, their daughter joined them, her backpack full of homework. "Mom," she asked, "are you going to keep fighting?" Rachel smiled, pulling her daughter close. "Always. But I'm also going to make sure you grow up in a world where you don't have to fight the way I did." Her daughter grinned. "You're pretty cool, you know." Fred laughed, wrapping his arms around them both. "That she is." The sun set slowly, casting a warm glow over their home. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel felt a profound sense of peace.